Here we go. Final hour of this Wednesday show, closing in on Kings basketball tomorrow. Summer League, day one, gets going from Las Vegas. Kings will be in action. And Brenden Nunes is going to be out there, and he joins us here right now, our Sactown Sports Kings insider. Good morning, Brenden. How are you?
Morning. I'm doing well, fellas. I'm glad I got my own little sound bite now. Works out well with Shannon over there. Yeah, I feel honored. I'm doing well. How about you guys?
We're great. That's here forever. I mean, Chris was so excited when he had that, and you've been waiting for that. You wanted to play that a lot earlier, didn't you, Chris? I mean, in other times.
I had to wait a long time for Nunes to score a goal.
Yeah.
I think you texted me right after. It was like, who's the better Nunes between the two? And I think I voted for Amanda, actually.
Well, you just wrote a piece on our Sactown Sports website, sactownsports.com, about the early Summer League practice takeaways. You've been out at a couple of those and had a chance to talk to the guys. I mean, Summer League, you got to take it for what it's worth, but would love your early thoughts, Brenden, on kind of what you're seeing and what you're expecting from these guys.
Yeah, I think what I'll start with, the context of Summer League, like you mentioned, is important. I tend to think that doing poorly in Summer League probably tells you more things than if somebody does well in Summer League. And neither is, a black and white sentence in either direction. But I think like a guy like Devin Carter, Mason Jones, these guys should dominate Summer League. And that doesn't mean that if they do, it means nothing or anything like that. It's a good growth opportunity. I think specifically Devin Carter, he didn't get to play in Summer League last year. He also missed a lot of games throughout the regular season. So I think this is a good opportunity for him, working on point guard reps a little bit. I think similar tone to what you heard when it comes to that last year, but obviously getting to see the rookies a little bit here. And I'm always curious, it's Summer League for everybody. I'm curious to see how Depeche Mystery does in the head job as well. A guy that, from my understanding, Doug has been pretty close with for a little while now. So Summer League for everybody. Exciting stuff. Little things like Isaiah Crawford looked a little bit bigger to me, but it's the time of year where you have to gauge, like, am I crazy or is he a little bit bigger?
Well, and you've had Summer League experiences. You've been out to Vegas a couple times, and to me, it's really enjoyable. I think it's a really fun time out there. It's a different vibe than the regular season, but it is about putting in work and getting better. And, I know the whole league has been saying this phrase, Brenden, for a while about positionless basketball, but I feel like with Devin Carter specifically, they're trying to see if he can be a point guard for a guy that's kind of been more of a combo guard. How do you think he will do in kind of giving a lot of reps at that one spot here?
Yeah, it's an interesting scenario to me. To be honest, I personally don't think that Devin Carter is a point guard. And, well, he would tell you as much. He said that I've never played point guard in my life, was a quote from him on Monday. And this, I'm assuming he meant prior to coming to Sacramento. Not that he did it a crazy amount last year, but I think they were trying to develop that. I always thought the path felt similar to Keon Ellis, just when it comes to that level, that development idea, rather than obviously their different journeys on who was or was not drafted in Keon's case. But like the handle needs to get there a little bit better. I think for Devin, he specifically mentioned making reads, and that's doing it from the ball handler's perspective. You have to know where everybody's on the floor, ridiculous amount of film that comes with that, and orchestrating everything. But Coach Dip said that he felt like Devin's communication was great. I think we're going to get a lot of keywords throughout Summer League here because there's only so much practice time. So it's, hey, we want to play hard. We want everybody communicating. And, I feel like I'm playing back in middle school and we want everyone to have fun. It's hard to take so much, I would say, but good expansion opportunities for guys like Devin for sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting just the way their current roster is constructed. I know yesterday was a press conference for Dennis Schröder, who will be the point guard, right? That was a need. I mean, they just really didn't have what you would call a true point guard. But between Malik, between Keon, between Carter, they've all played it. But it's amazing that they have that many guards that are kind of more combo than point on this roster.
They definitely do. It's been talent of the team, it feels like, for a little bit. Even when they had a lot of guards, it typically wasn't a lot of point guards, I guess you would say. Devin Carter, Nate Clifford probably falls into this a little bit too now. And even though maybe a little bit more of a three there, but I think the idea is obviously Dennis Schröder is supposed to be the starting point guard here. Scott Perry comes out, says, hey, that was my number one guy. I know some Kings fans didn't love that. I think you have to keep context in mind. Beginning of that, he's saying, hey, we needed a point guard. We want somebody to help set an identity. And the more I watch Schröder, the more I'm intrigued by what's there. I think kind of just somebody that can orchestrate everything, calm it all down. Having played on 10 different teams, this going to be team 10, I think means that you're pretty malleable for the most part, having played a lot of different roles. And so you have him to function in that way. Maybe they still try to go in a Russell Westbrook direction, or they could not be done and try to get another guy, because to me, the interest in Westbrook signals maybe you really thought you had 0 point guards on this team going into the offseason before Dennis. But luckily, you do also still have Domantas Sabonis on this team, who I think helps ease the burden when you have guys like Keon or Malik playing that one temporarily.
How much do you think, again, we don't know exactly what the roster will be, but at the moment it's still with LaVine and DeRozan, and those two guys have played together before. They're here together now. How much do you think Schröder will help get the best out of those two? Because each individually, we saw at times both play well, but it hasn't netted a bunch of wins for those two guys, whether it's with the Bulls or the Kings. Do you think Schröder can help those two guys individually if they're both Kings to start the year?
Yeah, I think that it still will take those guys obviously working to optimize themselves as well. And I don't think that the partnership between Zach and DeMar individually is the greatest thing, but I do think Dennis helps bridge that gap a little bit. When you have two guys that are more score first and need the ball in their hands, you need a point guard that's just going to be able to recognize, hey, DeMar's touched the ball 3 times in a row. Zach, it's been like 5 minutes. Let's go in that direction. Even just little things like that, I think matter when you have probably 4 or 5 guys on the team that I think all want to go out there and get some buckets, which we could talk about the roster construction if you wanted to go that direction, but that is its own thing. And I think that he will definitely help. And I'm a fan of how it's a temporary move. Yeah. I don't think that you're locking up anything long-term, and you remain flexible for any potential future moves to shake up the core of this roster, which is when I think we'll really start to get the idea of Perry's vision.
Yeah, we're talking with Brenden Nunes, Sactown Sports Kings insider. We will get more into this current team in a moment, kind of sticking with Summer League in Vegas for a few moments here too, Brenden, about you mentioned Nate Clifford. Ironically, his press conference, I know you were out there last week, he talked about how much point guard he played. I don't know how much he will play here, but he's been primarily more of a kind of a 3 in college, but can guard 1, 2s, and 3s is what he said. But what do you want to see from him in Vegas as we kind of focus in on the Kings' first-round pick?
It's basic, but I would say the biggest thing for me is probably the 3-point shot. It's something that was up and down throughout his collegiate season, and it's going to be key. It's the same thing for Devin Carter, really. And yeah, there are specifics of I'm curious to see how the handle translate. Can you do some secondary stuff? I think Nate Clifford, you mentioned him playing point guard in high school. I think he grew from 6 foot to 6'5". I believe it was between his sophomore and junior year in high school there. So played a lot of point prior. And I think the handle is where you will see that a little bit in some playmaking, but definitely more tertiary. I would say I'm curious to see how that 3-point shot looks and how he can adjust to the physicality of the NBA, a little bit more of like a slithery finisher that kind of embraced more physicality last season at Colorado State. One of the big reasons that he continued to develop into the first rounder that he did. So doing that at the NBA level is just a whole different beast, and it's the first chance to just like see these guys on court demeanor in a Kings uniform, which is always fun.
Yeah. The same thing for Maxime Reynaud. A lot of expectations for him, a true big, can do a lot of different things. Had a great couple of college years at Stanford. What do you want to see from Maxime when you see him in Vegas?
Yeah, we're around tall people a lot, but every once in a while there's one where you're like, man, you're just like extra tall.
Yeah.
For some reason, your 7 foot is just different than other 7 foot. And Maxime is a big 7-footer, and he put up 20 and 10 in college last year, scoring at that rate at Stanford, albeit being a senior, whatever you will, 5.5 threes a game, and you're knocking down a good rate. I am very, very curious to see, and something we have another availability later today. I'm curious to ask Dip about is he going to be putting the ball on the floor a little bit? Like there's a little bit of an idea of maybe there's a 4 in here somewhere. I've heard like Kelly Olynyk comps at the time of him being drafted, which all comps will have their flaws. But I'm curious to see what's working there. And defensively is not exactly his strong suit, but it seemed to be what was getting focused on a little bit yesterday, as he said it's a key for him to try and improve moving forward. And Dip complimented his communication on that end of the floor, which, not to be that guy, but if you're complimenting their communication on defense, I wonder what else is going on defense that's not being complicated, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned defense, and not that, look, I feel like for the better part of the last couple of years, that's been something that has been brought up more and more by the Kings organization, whether it was Mike Brown, the players themselves. I know it was very important to Doug Christie, but it hasn't been a great defensive team. I feel like Dip is saying that now. Scott Perry, the identity, they're trying to at least start here. Do you feel like there is truly a push to make this a more defensive oriented team, even if the roster may not look like it?
I think it's just going to be a process, but yes, I think we are seeing the early steps in that. And like you mentioned, Mike Brown definitely had those same messages. I think Monty was maybe where it got a little bit different, where it's not like he didn't care about defense, but sometimes it felt like him and Mike's messaging was a little bit different, right? Where, hey, Mike's saying this, but Monty's doing things that makes me think he's leaning a little bit more towards the offense. And right now, still very early in the process, obviously, but it feels like Scott Perry, Doug Christie are on the same page. The 6 things that I think Scott has mentioned every single time that we've talked to him so far, outside of saying we need a point guard, which I guess that got solved yesterday, is competitive, tough, team-oriented, disciplined, accountable, professional. Wants all of these things. That's what he wants it to mean to be a Sacramento King. And it's just going to be a process. And I think playing defense obviously goes very much into that. It's something he mentioned when introducing Schröder yesterday. I'm just, I don't know that it can be fair to expect a drastic turnaround when 4 of your top 7 guys are still not really good defenders.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the biggest tweak, right? And as of now, they're all here. I don't know if that's going to change. I mean, look, I think the summer market was immediate splash of free agency. We saw some trades early on, and then now it's kind of who's got money left. Everybody's worried about the apron. I think trades are becoming more and more difficult. I'm starting to believe, Brenden, that this might be closer to the roster to start the season. I know it's not going to be completely finalized, but where are you on kind of, they still have gluts in certain spots. They still have some things they probably would like to tweak, but do you think we're pretty close to what the roster will be?
It seems that way, but the Kings have definitely been pretty active, and I think that Summer League, obviously, I forget who coined the term, but somebody joked to me one time calling it like the Coachella of the NBA, and I've always loved that.
Right.
But this is where everybody's going to be in the same place. Like the Jonathan Kuminga conversations that have been ongoing, that I think are real, are probably going to continue in Vegas. It doesn't mean they're going to finish in Vegas, but if some other piece were to fall around the league, like it seems like people are waiting to see what's going to happen with Al Horford in free agency and what could happen with Russell Westbrook. So I think that we still could see some tertiary things, and Scott Perry loves to say that they're going to remain opportunistic. So if there's a domino to fall around the league, I think it could lead to something the Kings will jump on, but I wouldn't be shocked, to your point, if this is essentially the team that we were going into the season with.
Yeah, with obviously, I think it'll be easier to move some of the guys they may be coveting to move now during the season, maybe at the deadline, and just as teams develop and go on. Brenden, we saw earlier today there was some news from Shams that Chet Holmgren got a new max, basically rookie max deal. The number 1 pick, Paolo Banchero, had that. Jabari Smith got less, but those are the 3 guys that are selected before Keegan Murray. How do you think the Kings and Keegan Murray will handle his potential contract extension and if at all right now with him?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because the Jabari Smith Jr. number, you go look at his numbers compared to Keegan last year, they're almost identical, actually. I was shocked at how similar the numbers between those 2 guys were last year. So I think that the range of what we're talking about for Jabari and what he got is probably about right for Keegan. I don't have the number in front of me. I want to say it was about 27 a year over 5 years. And I think that's a fair range, but I also could understand from if you're Keegan's agent, do you sit there and think, well, we kind of got a bad hand last year. We got less reps, and this is harming our numbers and our conversation right now and in contract conversations. So maybe it's in their best interest to wait. I think the circumstances make for a weird scenario there, where if you're Keegan, you're probably really hoping, hey, let me get some touches here. I'm about to get paid this next chapter of my career, and it's not the easiest to see the path towards that. So I think, to me, the Jabari Smith Jr. number makes a lot of sense. I would be hesitant to go all too much higher than that, like really scraping into the 30s.
Yeah, because I mean, Keegan is an interesting player to me because I agree with you 100%. I thought the second they added DeMar DeRozan, I just was not surprised that Keegan's numbers and touches just would go down. I mean, DeRozan's been one of the games. He is one of the game's better scorers. You already had some bonus at the time. You had Fox, Monk. I mean, this was different than having Schröder and Barnes, and where Keegan can kind of some nights maybe be the second or third with most shot attempts. But now I thought that would go down. He ramped up his defensive ability. He's still very, very important to this team, but I think he was a harder one to read on his statistics last year than maybe even his first couple of years, in my opinion.
I would definitely agree. And, add all the off the court things that unfortunately leaked over into on the court last year, and Keegan being really close with De'Aaron Fox. I don't think that was the biggest secret. And so, just a lot of things happening, like Mike Brown, the first coach that Keegan had, and he gets to see the business of all this turning around. Like I think back to De'Aaron in the middle of the season saying that Keegan pulled him aside and was like, man, is this like the craziest season that you've ever been a part of? And De'Aaron's like, dude, what are you talking about? Like, you need to go back and look at some of these previous years. But that's what Keegan was thinking before De'Aaron got traded, So it was a hectic season. I think he might be a little bit overcast on the defensive end. I don't know that he's a guy that you want as your best defensive player. That doesn't mean I don't think he's a really, really good defender. It's just also probably hurting the offense a little bit. And I don't know that he's a guy that you put on Steph Curry and you put on LeBron James and Kevin Durant. There's very few guys in the league that do that. So I still am intrigued to see where the ceiling ends up going for Keegan. But also, admittedly, this is the point that I think was a big part of the conversation when people debated him or Jaden Ivey. I think we're reaching that point where the ceiling part of the conversation starts to matter a little bit more.
Very interesting. We're talking with Brenden Nunes, Sactown Sports Kings insider. So as the roster is constructed, it still seems a little bit imbalanced to me. I was talking about this earlier, Brenden, that it's not, to me, I don't look at this team that it's missing a large amount of talent. I think there's a lot of talented players. We're now back to kind of the fit position. Some of the holes are defensive things and duplications in the backcourt. I do feel like your word is right. Like there's more of a process here for Scott Perry. I don't know how much of a quick fix he can do, but if it is kind of the group that we're looking at right now, what do you see as some of the good things they have and maybe some of the issues they'd have going into the year?
Probably a lot of the similar issues that I think they've had in recent years, to be honest. I think that the other thing Dennis helps with is he plays really well with pace. It wouldn't surprise me if you lean back into that. I think it simplifies the game, specifically like Zach plays great in pace. Domas, obviously. DeMar was the one, as we saw last year, where maybe that's where you change up your speed of play a little bit when he's out there, even if that may be out of necessity at times. But I think that you still have enough offensive dynamic options that on any given night you can probably win a game. And I know a lot of NBA teams can say that, but it's one of those scenarios where I'm probably thinking that we're talking about a play-in team fairly similar to last year's record, unfortunately. But I'm also okay with that and think that the West is so just convoluted that it's, are they that different than the team that's going to be like the 4 seed? Because I just think they're in this huge group of teams that are probably from 4 to 12, 13, really. And they might be in the lower tier of it, but I feel like that's the wide range we're talking about here. And I don't think it leads to like potential postseason success, to be honest. But again, I like that it's temporary moves for Scott Perry while you try and rekindle some value for some of these top guys before you rework the core.
Yeah, and I think that's it. That's where I think they kind of had identified a core of what they thought was obviously Fox, Sabonis, and maybe Keegan and Monk were kind of working their way into it, and if not, a big part of it. Now I don't know what Perry's overall vision is here, but Sabonis can still be that guy. Levine could potentially be in that group, but I'm looking at that younger group, and is there someone there, whether that's Keegan, Keon, any of these draft picks or guys that they've kind of added, Carter, like, can they develop into where you go, yeah, that's a piece? And I don't feel like we're there yet. They will be a part of the team, but I don't know that we've identified them as kind of core builders for this team.
Yeah, the one that I'm really curious is I just want to see what happens with Devin Carter, man. I think that everybody is sort of overlooking him at this point. At least that's what it feels like. And somewhat understandably, it was a rough last season. Now his name gets thrown up in trade conversations, and people are like, oh, I want Jonathan Kuminga. Yeah, throw this guy in. We don't even know what he is. He was a lottery pick. And I think that he would have been even higher of a pick had he not have these shoulder injuries. And so obviously you can't just say that those don't exist. That was a big part of his year last season. He's had multiple shoulder surgeries on both sides throughout the years. And so that causes some concern. But if that 3-point shot, this is a big if, but there's a lot of guys in the league like this, I guess. But if that 3-point shot is legitimate, and I don't care about the funky form or whatever, if it goes in at a good enough rate off catch and shoots, then I think there's a role for Devin Carter. He plays extremely hard. Like Davion Mitchell, I would say close to level defense, and more so physicality, effort on that end, and some touch around the rim a little. He's got the same vertical as Malik Monk, 42 inches out there. So I would just say, don't sleep on Devin Carter. This almost feels like we're going into year one and a half. Like, it's still very early in his career.
Do you think he can be a difference maker as a combo guard, like really probably off the ball at 6'2"? And I mean, there are guys that have. Do you think he can be that kind of guy enough at his size off the ball?
I tend to think so. I think the athletic tools are there. I mentioned like the vertical, if you want to take that into account, but I think the length for sure, strength, and it feels like everybody gets compared to Josh Hart now, I guess, and Dante DiVincenzo, but I think it does sort of fall into that mold, and I think you're seeing those type of players continue to grow in value. Guys can just do a little bit of everything, but to your point, the 6'2" aspect of all this, and might even be a little bit kind. I don't know.
Right.
It was opposite of Maxime, I guess. It definitely is a complicated factor in all this, and probably the reason that he's being pushed to play point guard, even though he has never really been one, which complicates the development. But the size and the 3-point shot are definitely the big X factors there.
All right, one last one for you as we're talking with Brenden Nunes, Sactown Sports Kings insider. If the roster is constructed as it is, as we said earlier, and you kind of talked about maybe some of the things that fit Schröder a little bit better, or pace, and that could help someone like Levine, where maybe a slower pace can produce better benefits, let's say, for DeMar DeRozan. Which way would you lean? I know the pace may benefit more people, but I guess my question would be, would you lean more things that favor Levine or more things that favor DeRozan if you were operating things for the Kings?
I'm going Levine personally. And I think, like, say in a world where you go get Jonathan Kuminga, maybe he comes off the bench. I don't think Jonathan Kuminga would love coming off the bench. But maybe DeMar wouldn't either. But if it's completely up to me, DeMar's probably the one I'm bringing off the bench. I think that there's a way where, like you said, the pace fits more people than it doesn't. DeMar is really kind of the outlier here. It benefits, in my mind, most players, and it's not like it doesn't benefit DeMar. I just think he's more optimized in a slower half court, play at his own pace sort of game. So I think it has to be Zach, though. Even more so a guy, if we're talking trying to like rekindle value, I think you need to do that more for Zach LaVine than you need to do it for DeMar DeRozan, who has been in the league much longer, and everybody knows who DeMar DeRozan is. I think there's still this idea of like, just how good is Zach LaVine?
Right. Yeah, coming off a great year too, but it's like it still didn't impact a bunch of wins in Chicago nor here. But anxious to see what that looks like for him. Anxious to see what it all looks like in Vegas, Brenden. It should be a fun time down there. I know we'll see you down there and watch all your reports. So thank you as always for your time, and we'll see you in Vegas.
Sounds good. See you in Vegas. Thanks, Jason.
All right, thank you. That is Brenden Nunes. You'll get to hear and see Brenden more throughout all